In the bustling city of Maplewood, where the building lights never went out, Ethan Carter was starting another night shift at St. Mary's Hospital. At 34 years old, Ethan was the kind of nurse everyone wanted around. He had endless patience, a natural ability to calm even the most anxious patients, and a sincere smile that seemed to say, "You're going to be okay." But inside, Ethan was exhausted. Between working 12-hour days and struggling to care for his 5-year-old son, Liam, life was a constant battle. Widowed 3 years ago, Ethan never stopped. During the day, he took care of the house, helped Liam with his schoolwork, and tried to manage overdue bills. At night, he donned the white coat and focused his energy on caring for strangers, putting his own pain aside. That night, as he placed his backpack in the hospital locker, Ethan felt a strange unease. Something in the air felt different. Not that he had time to think about it. The emergency room was crowded, and he already heard the loudspeaker call to assist with another case. Despite the rush, Ethan never stopped being kind. Every patient received his full attention, even when he barely had time to breathe. This was what made him so special. Ethan deeply believed that his work was more than a profession. It was a mission. As he walked down the corridor with a clipboard in his hands, he had no idea that this night would be a turning point in his life. Something extraordinary was about to happen, and Ethan was destined to play a crucial role in a story he had never dreamed of. The sound of sirens filled the emergency room, signaling the arrival of another patient. Ethan, already accustomed to the chaotic routine, headed to the entrance, where the medical team was positioned to receive the ambulance. The door burst open with a bang, and 2 paramedics entered pushing a stretcher. On it was a woman, visibly distressed. Her clothes were wrinkled and dirty, as if she had wandered the streets for days. Her eyes, full of fear, seemed to search for something or someone, but there was no one there for her. "Name?" asked a receptionist, trying to start the intake form. "She has no ID." Found disoriented near the train station, one of the paramedics replied. "She says her name is Rachel, but we don't know anything else." Ethan approached and gave the woman a quick glance. Rachel was trembling, her hands tightly gripping the edge of the stretcher. Even in her confused state, there was something in the way she avoided eye contact that caught his attention. "Rachel, I'm Nurse Ethan. We're going to take care of you, all right?" he said, using the calm and steady voice he employed to soothe the most distressed patients. Rachel didn't respond, only slightly nodded her head, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. Ethan noticed small bloodstains on the corner of her blouse and a superficial cut on her left arm, seemingly caused by glass. He felt a pang of concern. "We're going to take you to triage," Ethan said, carefully pushing the stretcher. During the initial examination, Rachel remained silent. Every question was answered with minimal gestures, as if words were an unbearable burden. Ethan decided not to press her, focusing instead on treating her with kindness. He cleaned the cut, applied a bandage, and checked her vital signs, which were slightly abnormal. "Looks like you've had a rough night," Ethan commented as he finished the bandage. "But you're safe now." Rachel finally looked at him, and Ethan saw something in her eyes that made him pause for a moment. It wasn't just fear. It was a kind of despair that seemed to come from a much deeper place. "Thank you," she murmured, almost inaudible. Ethan nodded without asking questions. He knew that sometimes the best thing he could do for someone was to offer silence and understanding. As he left the room to get a prescription, he felt a strange sensation in his chest, as if this patient was more than just another case. Something told him that this encounter wasn't by chance. Ethan couldn't get Rachel out of his mind. After finishing his official shift, he decided to check on her. When he returned to the observation ward, he found Rachel sitting on one of the stretchers, holding a glass of water with trembling hands. "Do you need anything else?" he asked, approaching her. Rachel hesitated, as if deciding whether she could trust him. Finally, she shook her head, but Ethan noticed that something was wrong. "Rachel, you don't need to say anything right now. But if you need help, I'm here." He didn't know exactly why he was so determined to help her. Maybe it was the expression of vulnerability she showed, or the fact that no one seemed to be looking for her. Ethan felt an almost personal responsibility to ensure she was okay. Later that night, while the other nurses followed their routines, Ethan took advantage of his break to sit beside Rachel. In a gentle tone, he tried to start a conversation. "Do you have somewhere to go when you leave here?" Rachel took her time to respond. Finally, she shook her head in denial. "No, not now," she replied, her voice hoarse, almost a whisper. Ethan frowned. It was clear she was running from something or someone, but he decided not to press her. "Look, I know it's not easy to trust strangers, but you need a plan. Maybe a shelter? I can make some calls to find a safe place for you." Rachel looked up at him. There was something different in her expression now, perhaps gratitude, or just relief at finally finding someone willing to help her without expecting anything in return. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, suspiciously. Ethan shrugged, a small smile on his lips. "Because I can. And because everyone deserves a little help now and then." Rachel didn't respond, but this time she didn't look away. That night, Ethan stayed past his shift, making sure Rachel had a temporary place to stay when she left the hospital. He made several calls, talked to social workers, and finally found an organization that could help her. When he finished, the clock was almost midnight, and he was completely exhausted. Before leaving, Ethan returned to the room to inform Rachel about the plan. "I got it. They'll pick you up tomorrow morning. You'll be safe there, at least until you decide what to do next." Rachel looked at him, tears filling her eyes. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done without you." Ethan just nodded. "No need to thank me. Just do what's best for you." As he left the hospital, he felt a strange mix of fatigue and satisfaction. He didn't exactly know what motivated him to go so far for someone he barely knew, but he was sure he had done the right thing. What he couldn't imagine was that this decision would change his life forever. The next morning, while Ethan was reorganizing files at the hospital counter, he heard soft footsteps approaching. He looked up and saw Rachel, now dressed in clean clothes provided by the staff, but still with a vulnerable expression he knew. She was holding something in her hands, a small piece of paper folded several times. Rachel seemed hesitant, as if she was struggling with her own insecurity. "Can I talk to you?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Of course," Ethan replied, stepping away from the counter. He motioned for her to follow him to a more private corner of the waiting room. Rachel took a deep breath before extending the paper. "I wanted to give you this." Ethan took the note, noticing that her hand was trembling. He carefully unfolded the paper and read the words written in simple, yet emotional handwriting. "Ethan, I don't know how to thank you for everything you did for me. I came here broken, alone and hopeless, and you treated me as if I mattered. I can't explain how much this means. Maybe you'll never know, but your kindness saved my life. Thank you for reminding me that there are still good people in the world." He looked up at Rachel, who now avoided looking at him directly. "I'm not good with words," she said, her voice choked. "But I wanted you to know." Ethan remained silent for a moment, the note still in his hands. He knew Rachel had been through something she wasn't ready to share, but the words on the paper were more than enough for him to understand the impact his help had. "Rachel, you didn't have to do this," he said with a small smile. "But I'm glad to know that, in some way, I helped you." Rachel finally looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "You did more than help. You gave me a second chance." Ethan felt a lump in his throat but kept his voice steady. "Then use that chance, Rachel. Use it to find yourself again." She nodded, quickly wiping away her tears. "I'll try. I promise." Before leaving, Rachel hesitated once more. "I hope that one day, I can do for someone what you did for me." Ethan watched her walk slowly towards the exit, leaving behind not just the note, but also a feeling that their encounter was much more meaningful than it seemed. He kept the note in his pocket, knowing those words would stay with him for a long time. And in that moment, he realized that sometimes the simplest actions could leave deep marks, even if he didn't realize it at the time. The days that followed were a mix of routine and restlessness for Ethan. He tried to focus on his work at the hospital, but Rachel's memory lingered in his mind like a distant echo. There was something unfinished about her, like a slightly ajar door he didn't know whether to open. On Tuesday, while reviewing files at the start of his shift, Ethan overheard a conversation in the background. One of his colleagues, Linda, was commenting on the lack of information in the case of a patient who mysteriously disappeared after being discharged. "It's rare for someone to leave like that, with no records beyond the name," Linda said while organizing supplies. "It looks like she didn't even exist." Ethan, pretending to focus on the papers in front of him, knew exactly who she was talking about. He kept his head down but felt a pang of curiosity. Why had Rachel left so few clues about who she was? Later, in the middle of a shift, Ethan found the note Rachel had left still folded in his coat pocket. He had forgotten to remove it before washing his uniform, but the words were intact. Reading them again, he felt a mix of satisfaction and doubt. What exactly did she mean by, "You saved me"? On Thursday, while taking Liam to school, Ethan decided to share part of his unease with him. "You know, son, sometimes we do small things that can have a big impact on other people," Ethan said as Liam fastened his seatbelt in the back seat. "Like when I lent my pencil to Chloe and she called me her friend," Liam asked, with the innocence of his 5 years. Ethan laughed. "Exactly like that. But sometimes, we don't know how important it is until much later." Liam nodded, as if he had perfectly understood, and Ethan realized that, as simple as his explanation was, he himself was still struggling to find answers. On Friday night, after another exhausting shift, Ethan sat at the small kitchen table at home, looking at the note again. He wondered if he would ever hear from Rachel again, but something inside him said that the story wasn't over yet. At the same time, he couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. Regardless of where Rachel was now, he knew he had done what he could. It was a comforting thought, but it also fueled Ethan's curiosity about what would come next. What he didn't know was that, on the other side of town, someone was already planning the next chapter of this story. And when the phone rang that night, Ethan realized that the future was about to bring him answers he would never have expected. It was a typical morning at the hospital. Ethan had just finished a procedure when the receptionist called him over the intercom. "Ethan, can you come to the reception? There's something here for you." Curious, he left the file he was reviewing and quickly walked to the counter. The receptionist handed him a small, elegant envelope with his name handwritten on the front. There was no sender or any indication of who had sent it. "Seems important," she commented, smiling. Ethan shrugged and opened the envelope right there. Inside was a thick paper card with embossed letters. The message was brief but intriguing. "Ethan Carter, your kindness has touched more lives than you realize. We would like to invite you to a special meeting. Address: 546 Oakwood Lane. Time: 7 p.m. Date: tomorrow." He stood still for a moment, looking at the card, trying to decipher who could have sent it. The address was in one of the city's wealthiest neighborhoods, a place he never would have a reason to visit. "Any idea what this is about?" he asked Linda, who was passing by the reception and noticed his confused expression. "I have no idea," he replied, putting the card in his pocket. Throughout the rest of the day, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the invitation. Was it something related to the hospital? Some kind of charity event? Or maybe Rachel? When he got home that night, he told his son, Liam, about the invitation while helping him put on his socks before bed. "Is there going to be food there?" Liam asked, with the simplicity of a child. Ethan laughed. "I don't know, but I hope so." Despite joking with his son, he couldn't shake the mix of anxiety and curiosity he felt. It wasn't often that someone like him, with such a simple life, was called to something so mysterious. While putting Liam to bed later, Ethan looked at the small room that could barely accommodate his son's toys and thought about how their lives could change. He was used to struggling, making do with what he had, but that invitation seemed like a rare chance, a possibility he couldn't ignore. The next morning, while having coffee, Ethan picked up the card again. He was still hesitant, but the image of Rachel at the hospital came back to his mind. Her look, full of fear and vulnerability, was impossible to forget. And if this had something to do with her? "All right, I'm going," he murmured to himself, as if he needed to hear the words to believe them. At 6 p.m., Ethan put on his best shirt, a simple piece, but one he kept for special occasions. He didn't have a suit or expensive shoes, but he decided to be himself, without trying to impress anyone. When he finally arrived at Oakwood Lane, the contrast with his life was almost disorienting. Wide streets, perfectly aligned trees, imposing mansions. He felt like he had stepped into a movie. As he parked the car, Ethan took a deep breath, his hands slightly sweating on the wheel. "Well, here I am," he murmured, grabbing the card from the passenger seat. The gate opened automatically, as if they already knew he was there. As he drove through it, Ethan realized he was entering something bigger than he could comprehend. Inside the mansion, a man with an impeccable appearance was waiting for him at the entrance. "Mr. Carter?" he said, with a polite smile. "Yes, that's me," Ethan replied, his voice firmer than he expected. "Please, follow me." As he walked through the luxurious corridors, Ethan couldn't help but think about what awaited him. Every step seemed to echo the weight of his decision, but something inside him said he was exactly where he needed to be. When he finally entered the main room and saw Rachel, he knew he was right. This choice wasn't just about curiosity. It was about discovering what his kindness had caused and how it would change everything. Ethan had barely settled onto the sofa when he realized how different that world was from his own. Everything around him seemed to scream wealth, from the crystal chandelier hanging in the center of the room to the soft sound of classical music playing in the background. Rachel remained standing, watching him with a gentle but cautious expression. "First of all, I want to thank you for coming," Rachel said, her voice low, almost reverent. I know this must seem strange, but I need you to know how grateful I am for everything you did for me." Ethan, still trying to process everything, just nodded, his curiosity growing by the second. Before he could respond, the man sitting on the opposite sofa stood up. He looked to be in his mid-40s, wearing a tailored suit, exuding natural authority. "Ethan Carter, my name is Charles Donovan," he began, extending his hand. "I'm a consultant and a close friend of Rachel's." Ethan shook his hand, feeling increasingly out of place in that room. "She's spoken a lot about you," Charles continued. "When she told us how your compassion and kindness changed everything, we knew we had to reach out." Ethan looked from Rachel to Charles, still not fully understanding. "I didn't do anything special," Ethan said, his voice firm but modest. "I just did my job." Rachel smiled, now sitting beside him. "No, Ethan. You did more than that. You saw someone lost, scared and hopeless, and treated me as if I mattered." Her words touched Ethan in a way he hadn't expected. No matter how much he tried to downplay his actions, something in Rachel made him realize that, for her, it had been a turning point. Charles continued, "Ethan, you need to understand that at that moment, Rachel was about to make irreversible decisions. But your compassion made her stop, reflect, and above all, believe that there was still hope." Ethan remained silent, the words weighing on him. He had never thought about the impact of his actions that day. Rachel took her champagne glass again but didn't drink. Instead, she looked directly at Ethan. "I gave you something that not even all the money in the world could buy at that moment. Dignity. And for that, Ethan, I will be eternally grateful." Her words hung in the air, laden with sincerity. Ethan felt his chest tighten, but began to understand that this encounter was more than just a thank you. Something bigger was about to happen, and he was at the center of it all. Ethan stayed silent, still staring at the documents in the folder. The amount described was surreal for him. It was enough money to pay off all the debts that plagued him, and still have left to build something lasting. He shook his head, unbelieving. "Is this for real?" he asked, looking at Rachel and then Charles. "You want to do all this for me?" "Yes, Ethan," Rachel replied, with a genuine smile. "I want you to have the opportunities you deserve, just as you gave me an opportunity when I was lost." Charles interjected, indicating the papers in the folder. "This fund covers your complete education, including any nursing specialization you want to pursue. Additionally, there's a reserve for Liam. He will have access to a good education without you having to worry about the costs." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat at the mention of his son's name. He had always wanted to ensure the best for Liam, but financial difficulties made that almost impossible. "I don't know what to say," he murmured, his voice faltering slightly. Rachel leaned forward, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You don't need to say anything. I just want you to know that you deserve this. It's not just a reward, Ethan. It's an investment. I want you to continue being the incredible person you are, because the world needs more people like you." Ethan took a deep breath, trying to process everything. He was a proud man, used to fighting for everything he had, but Rachel's sincerity and the impact his actions had on her convinced him that accepting this wasn't selfish. It was an opportunity to do even more. After a few moments of silence, he finally found his voice. "I don't know if I deserve all this, but thank you. Truly." Rachel smiled, visibly moved. "You deserve it, Ethan. And don't worry, this is just the beginning." Ethan looked at the papers again, feeling a mix of emotion and gratitude. He knew that this was the start of a new phase in his life, but he also felt the responsibility to use this opportunity to give back to the world, just as Rachel had done for him. As he closed the folder, Rachel raised her champagne glass again. To you, Ethan. And to the future you're still going to build. And, in that moment, Ethan realized that his life would never be the same. The impact of Rachel's gesture was felt immediately in Ethan's life, but what he didn't expect was how it would transform him in deep and irreversible ways. From the moment he accepted the generous fund, Ethan dedicated himself to a greater purpose, ensuring that this gift was multiplied for the benefit of others. He enrolled in a specialized nursing course with an emphasis on hospital management. The classes were intense, but Ethan, as determined as ever, absorbed every concept with the fervor of someone who knew exactly what he wanted to achieve. Liam, in turn, became his greatest motivation. Are you studying to save even more people, Dad? Liam asked one night while watching Ethan with books scattered across the table. That's right, champ. I want to help as many people as possible, Ethan replied with a smile, feeling a warmth in his chest. But his transformation went beyond his studies. At the hospital, Ethan began applying what he learned, developing systems to improve the efficiency of care. He also got involved in community health programs, organizing events to bring free medical care to the most underserved areas. Rachel, true to her word, stood by him every step of the way. She not only funded the renovation of his home, but also helped Ethan form partnerships with local and business organizations. In one of these meetings, Rachel noticed something different in him, a confidence that was once only latent now fully blossomed. "You've changed, Ethan," she commented during a lunch meeting. "Changed?" he replied, raising an eyebrow, curious. "Yes. Before, you just did what was necessary. Now, you lead. You inspire." Her words made him reflect. Ethan realized he was no longer just the dedicated nurse. He had become a transformative force. However, the greatest proof of his change came when he and Rachel began working on a project for an accessible health center for the community. Ethan led meetings, presented ideas, and even negotiated with investors, something he never imagined he would do before. At the inauguration of the clinic, named Horizons, Ethan gave an emotional speech to the crowd gathered to witness the moment. "It all started with a gesture of compassion," he said, holding the microphone firmly. "One night at the hospital, I realized that even without knowing, I had the power to change someone's life. Today, with this center, I want to give you the same opportunity for transformation that was given to me." The crowd applauded, and Ethan felt a wave of emotion. He was no longer just the man struggling to survive. He was now someone who helped others live fully. Later, while watching the clinic lights shine for the first time, alongside Rachel and Liam, Ethan felt he had found his true purpose. And in that moment, he realized that the greatest transformation wasn't in his career or achievements, but in the way he saw the world, full of possibilities and people waiting for a chance to start over. Ethan's transformation was more than professional progress. It was a personal revolution that inspired everyone around him, proving that compassion and determination can create waves of unimaginable change. Over time, the connection between Ethan and Rachel grew beyond what either of them could have imagined. What began as gratitude and reciprocation evolved into a solid friendship, built on mutual respect and admiration. Rachel, who once saw herself as a woman surrounded by people interested only in what they could gain from her influence, found in Ethan an anchor of authenticity. They often met to talk, reflect, and even plan projects that combined their strengths, Rachel's business acumen and Ethan's practical knowledge and empathy. "Have you ever thought about opening your own clinic?" Rachel asked in one of these meetings while having coffee at a local bakery. Ethan laughed, shaking his head. "I've thought about it, yes. But, to be honest, I never thought it was a real possibility." "Well, now it is," she replied, determined. "You have the resources, the experience, and most importantly, the heart for it." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing the idea. A clinic that serves low-income people, maybe. Something that really makes a difference. Rachel smiled, excited. "That would be amazing. And I'll be by your side to make it happen." With Rachel's encouragement, Ethan began sketching plans for the clinic. He didn't just want to create a healthcare space. He wanted it to be a place where people felt seen, just as he had made Rachel feel that night at the hospital. But their friendship wasn't limited to work. Rachel became an important figure in Liam's life, helping him with advice and even taking him to cultural and educational events. "She's nice, Dad," Liam said after one of these outings. "But why does she always smile so much when she's with you?" Ethan laughed, trying to ignore the warmth rising to his face. "Because we're friends, Liam. And sometimes, good friendships are like that." Despite some friends insisting there was something more between him and Rachel, Ethan focused on what they had in that moment. To him, what mattered was the bond they had created, a friendship that had changed both of their lives. Rachel, for her part, felt that Ethan helped her see the world more clearly. He never treated her as someone extraordinary, but that made her feel even more special. "Thank you for continuing to be who you are, Ethan," she said one day. He smiled. "Thank you for never giving up on yourself, Rachel." The bond between them became a transformative force for both, and Ethan began to realize that sometimes the connections we make are the true gifts life gives us. The community clinic Horizons, the result of Ethan and Rachel's joint efforts, was inaugurated a year later. The space, located in the heart of the city, was more than a medical center. It was a sanctuary for those who needed it most. The line of people on opening day was living proof that Ethan's dream was becoming reality. As he cut the inaugural ribbon alongside Rachel and Liam, Ethan felt a surge of emotion. He never imagined his life would take that turn, and it all started with a simple act of kindness. Rachel, who was now dedicated to philanthropic projects, also found a new passion. Working alongside Ethan brought a renewed purpose to her life, and she knew her debt to him could never be fully repaid, but that didn't stop her from trying. "This is just the beginning, Ethan," Rachel said during the inauguration ceremony. "For all of us," he replied, looking out at the crowd with gratitude. The days that followed were marked by heartwarming stories. Patients who previously had no access to health care left the clinic with restored dignity. Nurses and doctors, inspired by Ethan's example, worked tirelessly to provide the best possible care. One night, after a long day of work, Ethan and Rachel sat on the steps of the clinic's entrance. Liam was playing with other volunteers in the parking lot. "Do you remember when you told me that small acts of kindness can transform lives?" Rachel asked, looking up at the starry sky. Ethan laughed softly, shaking his head. "I never imagined that would include me." Rachel turned to him, her expression soft but intense. "You didn't just transform my life, Ethan. You created an impact that will last for generations." He smiled but remained silent for a moment, absorbing her words. "I sometimes think all this is a dream," he confessed. "It's not a dream. It's the result of who you are," Rachel said, lightly touching his shoulder. Ethan looked at her and, for the first time, allowed himself to believe that what they had built together was just the beginning of something even greater. The clinic, the bond with Rachel, and the impact he had on the community were proof that even in the darkest moments, a gesture of compassion could ignite a light that would never fade. As night fell over the city, Ethan felt at peace. His journey had been marked by struggles and challenges, but also by deep connections and lasting changes. He knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that the path he had taken had not only transformed the lives of others, but his own as well. And, in that instant, he realized he was exactly where he was meant to be.